So welcome everybody to this session and during the session, the first meeting of the Health and Human Services Committee. We do have one new member, Kim Schofield. And Kim, where are you? Down there on the end. Stand up and let all the committee welcome you here. Glad to have you join us. What's your district?
60.
And that's where?
Jolton County and Clayton County, the cities of East Point, College Park, Southeast Atlanta, a little bit of Hayesville. That's it.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, let's get underway. Where's my, get to my, yes?
I moved through past HB 747.
Oh, okay. You had, all right. I think, be good, Billy. Okay, Representative Tanner. Is Representative Tanner here? Let's get you in and out of here. Should be I'm afraid to say it should be an easy bill, fairly quick bill, or whatever, because it'll take a turn for the worse.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was hoping you wasn't going to jinx me by saying it was a simple bill.
No. House Bill 701.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hopefully it will be easier than the bill you and I worked on last session, though.
Hopefully.
This bill does one simple thing. The federal government changed their rules around drug testing that went into effect January 1st of this year. All this will allow us to do as a state in pre-employment drug screening is to also include a test for the semi-synthetic opioids, which would include oxycodone, oxymorphine, hydrocodone, and hydromorphine. It's pre-employment drug screening. If the individual, the employee or potential employee has a prescription, they just indicate that in the beginning during the test, like any other medication they may be taking, would not stop someone who's got a prescription from being able to get hired. It's just looking for those who are abusing the substance. Madam Chair, that's all that the bill does. If there's any specific questions I can answer, I'll be happy to, and I have Autumn here who's the resident expert in this area if I'm not able to do it.
Okay, questions from the committee? What? Is it going to be a first time? No questions from the committee. Okay, do I have a motion?
Motion to pass. Second.
Okay, we have a motion to pass and second. Okay, any further discussion from the committee? Okay, before we move on final passage, did you have anybody to sign up that wants to, where's the sign up sheet? Do we have anybody that wants to speak on the bill? 701. Okay. All right. We have no one to speak on the House bill, so I would say everyone in favor of House Bill 701, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it. Thank you, Representative Tanner. It's on its way.
Thank you.
That was a lot easier. You can come back anytime. Or maybe that tells you where the bills that we want to pass, Representative Tanner, need to go.
Yes, ma'am.
When they're good bills like that one. As long as they're good bills. Okay. All right. Moving on. House Bill 473, Representative Kirby. And I think that Representative Kirby gave you a handout. This was in today's Atlanta Constitution. And if you are from the metro area, you've seen that we have had several articles lately on this subject. So it is a timely subject. Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you here to present House Bill 473 today. This bill originally authored and dropped in 2015, and again the start of this biennial in 2017. There was originally a second section to it that talked about giving service animals the same protection as police dogs, making it a felony to kill one intentionally. So it was always assigned to the judiciary committees, which we love our partners down there and how well they vet bills, but it does make it a challenge. But by the time we decided to pull that off and make a separate bill out of it, we with their help and what we did over the 3 years prior to this one, I think we've got a pretty good piece of legislation that does what we want it to do. For service animals, it doesn't add any extra stuff to them. It really doesn't. It doesn't change law. What it does is goes after the fake service animals more. And it gives the people with true service animals some help when they get in a situation where somebody's questioning whether that animal is allowed in there or not. And I think the first thing we got to understand, and I think it was said very clear to me in dealing with using an example of somebody that's vision impaired, our eyes are right here on our face. And wherever we go, they go. And they're allowed in the restaurants and the hotels and hospitals, doctors' offices, apartments. For somebody visually impaired, their eyes are at the end of their hand attached to that leash. Now, you and I may see a dog, but that's their eyes. And that's what we talk about with the service animal. They are trained to perform a major life activity. And the first thing you see on line 20, and this is right out of the ADA, we're not reinventing law. Major life activity means those actions necessary to function effectively in society and shall include ambulating, seeing, hearing, learning, working, and interacting with others. Not changing law, not recreating it, taking it right out of the ADA, what a service animal truly is, performing these functions. And we, again, in line 31, again, the service animal's trained to do that and assist with those things. And we put in there at the end that such terms shall not include an animal solely providing comfort, emotional support, or companionship, because those are pets. We love our pets. I've raised animals all my life. Grew up on the farm. You know, I've had 3,000-pound livestock that's more of a pet than a farm animal. I mean, it's, you know, we love pets, but companionship and comfort and things that pets do make our lives better are not performing major life activities. And they don't need to be in a restaurant and grocery store and everything else we go to. I don't even take my dog to PetSmart. Not in the store. She loves to ride. She loves to ride, but she has no interest in going in that store with all those other dogs. She'd just rather sit out there in the car. As long as it's not summertime and hot, you know, we take good care of her. But she's a pet. She gives us comfort. She gives us companionship. But she's not trained to perform any major life activities. Now, what this does, if you look on, really get to the crux of it on page 102, Department of Human Services, all right? They'd be allowed to work with private agencies. We're not trying to spend a lot of money. We're not certifying, registering, creating a state license or anything else. Basically, on their part, all they would need to do is generate a PDF, something I could do in about 2 hours, and I'm certainly not an expert in Adobe creating PDFs. That would create this card, and it says, here's what the front of the card is going to be, and here's the back. And the back actually has right out of the ADA that you can, you know, what you can, or the front, excuse me, talks about it, what you can ask somebody with a service animal. And it talks about the fake service animals again. So really no real time, money, or anything by any of our agencies. And if somebody says, well, that might fit better with our developmental disabilities group, our agency, that's fine too. We're not, you know, it's just not enough work to worry about any one agency who has it. So they would have this card, so if they did go in a restaurant and they had that service animal, and from what I understand in the research, when we talk service animals in Georgia, they're all dogs except there is one miniature horse. And I'll be the first one to admit, if I saw a miniature horse go in a restaurant pulling a wagon to help somebody move around, it would get my attention, and I would, you know, now I would understand what it is, and I'm sure in that town where the person lives that has that, people are probably more used to it, but if you were just passing through it, I'm sure that would gather your attention. But the other part of this, and it's important that it's not in the bill, but you understand about service animals, even in that restaurant where they're allowed, they still have to behave. If they are not behaving properly, any property owner can ask them to leave, all right? So a companion animal is one thing, and they don't behave, but a service animal, typically, if you see them, they'll be right there at their handler's feet. They don't make sounds, they're not barking, they're not causing commotion. Most of the time you wouldn't even know they're present other than when they walk in and walk out. So that is an important part of this. So this card would certainly give them just a little bit of help if the restaurant owner or somebody, or even if they're trying to rent an apartment, that this is actually a service animal. It has a state seal, and the Lions Club, Wounded Warriors are the two that I would think could be the ones in best position to give these out on our behalf. The other thing it does then is if you've got a pet and you're trying to pretend like it's a service animal, all right, we did make that a $2,000 fine if you're willingly trying to pass off a fake service animal, because those are the ones that are causing the problems. That's the article here you read about. Now, the airlines actually have a little different thing they have to deal with called the Air Carrier Access Act of 1986, that literally any animal that somebody says is there for emotional support, they're supposed to let on. And some of our flight attendants and pilots from Delta have shared some pretty bad horror stories with pigs running up and down the planes. And there's a picture here on this one's a duck.
Yeah.
You know, you know, snakes. With snakes on a plane, that's probably wouldn't be my comfort animal of choice. But I'm glad to see, if you read this article, Delta's starting to stand up to this is federal law that they're having to deal with, the Air Carrier Act. We don't need pets being fake service animals. We need to protect our service animals, and if you're trying to pull off a fake one, we got some ammunition there. So, like I said, we've been working on this for 4 years. We're very appreciative of the Judicial Non-Civil Committee and all their work to help perfect this part of the language, and we'll continue to look at protection. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and I think there may be a few signed up to speak to kind of tell you some of the problems they run into or some of the issues.
Okay. Questions from the committee? Representative Mitchell.
Can I be heard? I guess. Representative Kirby, I appreciate your fine efforts as usual. You mentioned part of my question in that the airlines will not have to comply with this law because they're under other jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction, in their laws. But let me just ask you this: practically, take me through how this would work. Whose responsibility would it be to determine whether, or to even ask if someone has an official service animal? Would that burden be on the company, the merchant, the restaurant, or wherever?
Well, under the ADA, if somebody were to walk in an establishment with an animal, any animal, you can ask them really two questions legally. Is this a service animal? And they reply, yes, it is. It is. What major life activity is this animal trained to perform? And then you've got that list right out of the ADA on this bill. It's got to be trained to perform one of those activities. That's what makes it a service animal, trained to perform those major life activities. Companion, comfort, support, things our pets do are not major life activities.
Yeah, if I may continue, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Then if the merchant company, whomever, does not ask, is there any liability on the merchant for allowing a service animal to come in that doesn't have the proper certification?
Well, it wouldn't have a certification. We're trying to stay away from certification. We're just trying to give the service animal community some help if somebody is questioning their right to be there. One of the issues you run into that they've run into, and you may hear later from, is some of these fake animals, is they actually attack other dogs because they're not properly trained. And interestingly enough, a service animal, for a visually impaired person, they are their eyes. They are not trained to defend themselves like we would with human nature, and sometimes these animals get hurt really bad because some other dog's attacking it, and it knows its job is to see for their master and not protect themselves.
And lastly, Madam Chair, so the gist of your bill is that if they ask and they are dishonest, that you're placing penalties.
If it's not yes, there would be for trying to pull off a fake animal, it would be a penalty, yes, sir.
I don't know whether the committee realizes right now we have a wonderful service animal present for the committee hearing, and I doubt that anybody really knows that animal's in the room. They are trained not to bark and to remain by their person's side, and we have a fine example of it. Did she ride by your side? Yeah, Sarah? Not barking, not.
There's another one.
Is there another one behind you? Okay.
I know the other one's back there.
That's back in the back and
I didn't know Dawn came.
doing their job. Okay. Which they do quietly and with great dignity and without mauling and attacking other animals.
Madam Chair, if may, in 2015, we had a brief interview with And I think there was 8 or 9 of them in the Capitol within 10 yards of each other, and not a sound was made. They're not bothering each other, not checking each other out. They're there to work.
And the only problem they cause is that they make dog lovers want to pet them. And that is a real problem, and I have to almost remind myself to keep my hands off, and especially for certain ones that are just as sweet as they can be. Representative Hawkins.
Help me understand why we're crossing out dogs. I notice all through this bill. I mean, I realize service animals could be something else, but not a hamster on a string, I hope.
No. There is, in Georgia, there is one miniature horse that we are aware of.
And that's the reason we're crossing
It-
dogs
it's
out
a-
for that miniature horse?
And it's a service animal, can be a dog or miniature horse. Legislative Council changed that wording. If you prefer service dogs, as long as council don't have a problem with it, I have no issue with that.
I mean, it seems like we're opening a wide door when we draw out dogs and put service animals. Seems like we're compounding a problem.
Betsy?
I mean, if you want it to be broader, obviously you're gonna have to use more general term, which I think is what the drafter did on this. So if you wanna limit it to dogs, of course, you stick with the language.
Is the
And I
federal
wouldn't,
laws-
I would not object to that at all, to move this forward.
I'd feel more comfortable that way.
Okay?
I don't know about the committee, but. Well, the duck, yeah, cut the duck out. But the hamster, I'm still worried about the hamster on a string part. Okay, that's it.
Okay, yeah, okay, we'll see about that as amendment. Okay, Representative Petrie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Kirby, you mentioned this as restraining really some of the current situation. I've had quite a few constituent calls about people perceiving that there are many that are abusing this. So, but when you change, what we have currently is physically disabled persons, and we've changed it here to physically disabled or mentally impaired. So isn't that an expansion of the, don't you see that as an expansion? Are we not going to see more people using these because of that language?
You shouldn't, because again, it's a major life activity, and you think about some of our wounded warriors, and we talk about their major life activity of working. There was one gentleman, and his dog, for him just to walk down the street, he cannot go around a corner. His dog goes, because of his PSTD, his dog goes around, clears the corner, also goes in and clears different rooms. He doesn't have a physical property, and he's one of those guys that has these issues, and why this is so important that we give him a little help. To look at him, talk to him, you wouldn't think there's anything going on, but inside his head, as he said, when somebody snuck up behind me in Baghdad and I knocked him out, it was a good thing. When I did it in Kroger and Kennesaw, it wasn't so good. And he's right. And so that's where that came from, as Jeremy at the time was our legislative counsel, and we worked through that wording going through the judicial committees. But I don't think it opens it up, because it's still dealing with the major life activity the dog's trained, or the animal is trained to perform, not the person.
Thank you.
Let me ask, Representative Kirby, would you not think, and let me ask Betsy. Betsy, could someone who has that one for, considers their dog for anxiety or something, could they stretch that, for a minor?
Well, it's still gotta be tied into the major life activities, like Representative Kirby said, so that's on, page 1, so it's gotta interfere in their ambulating, seeing, hearing, learning, working, and interacting. So, unless you could say that their anxiety is interfering in one of those major life activities, I guess you could beat that, but, and then under the definition of service animal, and now, and if we change that to dog, it says, but not just purely providing time for emotional support or companionship. So there's a gray area there, I would say, but, if you have a doctor certifying that, you have anxiety and this helps, then, even though that's not required of the bill.
Can you think of any way to tighten that? Just think about it.
Hey.
All right.
And Madam Chair, as I went through this, one of the things we talked about, we want to help our service animal community. If somebody slides through, I'd rather have somebody slide through than somebody who actually has a service animal be kicked out or denied service. It's kind of like the old saying, we'd rather have a guilty guy go free as opposed to an innocent man ever sent to jail. And this is about helping the people to make sure have access to the things that they should have with their service animals.
Okay, so you're more concerned about people with service animals being turned away because of the abuse
And the
necessarily than the people that are. I mean, you have concerns about the people that are abusing
Yeah,
it, but
they're
the main
abusing it,
thing
that's
is
what's causing the problem. So that's kind of the root cause. But you know, let's take care of the people we can take care of and help them the best we can. And if we need, you know, sometimes you got, as we know, we come back the next year with a add-on or different bite at the apple or something that's come up. So
okay. Representative Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions. One, as we change the term service animal back to service dog, I wanted to ask the question about the capuchin monkeys that we have dealt with in the past and had here in the committee. Because they do help people, they reach, they stretch, they do all those things that folks can't do. And there was a discussion at one time regarding them back when Doug Tieper was a state representative. So if you go to dog, you're totally leaving out the capuchin monkeys, and I know those have been used for service. My second question is, again, we go back to emotional support, and I know that's where there's somewhat of a problem. But with PTSD and the dog, a lot of that is emotional support. So how are we taking out emotional support but allowing someone who's former military at the PTSD having one for emotional support too?
because the animal's trained for a major life activity, it's just emotional support, and that's what it says. Just these comfort, emotional support in the service animal. But when it's trained to perform this major life activity, you know, there's no doubt that everybody with a service animal probably gets some emotional support from their animal, just like anybody else would raising an animal. But these animals are trained for those specific major life activities, and that wounded warrior that has that dog trained to help them with whatever that major life activity they need help with, yeah, they probably get some emotional support out of it as well. And there's great stories about that. But you know, that's another good part of having pets.
What about those dogs that will detect when their owner's blood pressure's up, or they're going to have a stroke, or have this or that or something?
It's very specifically, they're dogs that detect seizures. And one of the things I did find interesting, a seizure animal is not a service animal. That's not that they're not important, but it's not trained to perform a major life activity. It does detect the onset of a seizure. And like I said, my intent was not to change the definition of the law of what a service animal is. Right now, they're not recognized. Again, that's something in a few years people may say, you know, we really need to add a dog that's trained to detect a seizure to this list. I wouldn't have any problem doing that. But that would be changing the definition that I was not trying to do in this bill.
I understand that. And then going back to the capuchin monkey, because you changed the word to dog away from animals, so what do we do with people that do have monkeys
All
that
the
assist
research
them?
I've found in Georgia, that there's only one non-dog as a service animal, and that's a miniature horse. There's no monkeys in Georgia acting as service animals at this time. So
That may be a good thing. If I remember correctly, when Representative Tieper at the time brought the monkey down, he bit one of the representatives. And
Which one?
and he finished that performance by throwing rather offensive bodily fluid at people. It's not funny, but it happened. Which would certainly not bode well for the monkey at a restaurant or anywhere else, but it's hard to control the monkey. Right. Representative Reinders.
Really? I'm going to follow that? Really? Y'all need to be serious on this committee.
Well, were you here when Tieper was here and brought the monkey?
I
I think
am.
you were. Okay.
Wow. All right, let's do a little cleanup first, if you don't mind. And I'm assuming on line 17, the department is referencing what you said on 102, the Department of Human Services, the same department? Right?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to, if I may continue, Madam Chair. what we're trying to do here is not make it so broad that there's abuse,
Absolutely.
or so narrow that we have the unintended consequence. Finding that balance is always tricky. And so unless I'd like clarification from legislative counsel first. The department shall promulgate rules and regulations. Does that mean we'll know? Do they have to give us a report?
Well, that doesn't require them to.
Okay, well, that'll be something that we may look at, because if we do get into a situation where we see the window so big of abuse, that may be something that we then can identify the abuses and narrow it through legislative oversight that we've done in other things in the past. But I think if we can get them through rules and regulations to kind of keep up with, that may actually help us to curtail the abuse.
Well, and one of the things I'm going to do, I'm not going to take a vote today, Representative Kirby, because at the last minute, I really learned that the Department of Community Health doesn't want this.
Whoa.
Okay, and DHS. Okay, which is correct, DHS, okay. Commissioner Crittenden. Okay, DHS doesn't feel like it's the right fit. But I'm gonna let the discussion go on, because if we're gonna have to clean this up, let's just get it out now and clean up the bill. Like if whichever department gets it, then we're gonna, if we want to put in rules and
And so I hope, Madam Chair, I hope the author's taking notes of this, because I have questions concerning private service organizations. I would also like to know, whoever agency, when we get this corrected, to know which ones they have turned down and which one they approve, or maybe more importantly, what is the criteria for deciding?
And
I don't want the left Brotherhood of Benevolent saying, I need one here. Additionally, I see nothing in the language that if you ask everyday Georgians about abuse, everybody has compassion and a sensitive heart. What they just hate is when they see a placard hanging on something in a parking spot. And I know you can't always see every disability, for lack of a better way of putting it, but I see nothing in this language that says that that card is non-transferable.
okay.
Because if I was Joe Q waitress in a restaurant and I had my monkey,
Or your hamster.
Hamster.
okay, my hamster,
With
my
all your
horse.
children, did they have problems with
If
their
someone came up to me and I produced a card and I'm just someone trying to make a living, I'm going to assume with a nice pretty seal and all that, which is what your language says, that they're good to go, and I would never want to do anything that violates the American with Disabilities Act, so I don't even question it. So I would like to see something with penalties as it relates to something that is transferable
Okay.
to someone who shouldn't get it. And
And I would interject, one of the discussions we had quite a bit with the judiciary committees in the early days of this bill is whether or not to go ahead and name the organizations. We could, Lions Club International is one that comes to mind. When we talked about whether or not, and if it's the will of this committee, we can certainly put that in a substitute or amended bill to say, all right, these are the two we're going to deal with, so we also then know that it's not going outside of.
I just like having oversight, I guess, is my bottom line when they do rules, and having a mechanism, because, Madam Chair, you may recall a meeting we had recently where we were talking about actually looking at some of these organizations and having to come to us first before they change the rules, because some have gotten too broad with their interpretations of legislative intent, and was actually looking at making them do it to us or letting us know in advance as opposed to after the fact. And again, the non-transferable. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so your recommendation would be that you want the department, State Department, just to be the only ones that do it?
No, I think that what we should do is make sure that whatever the language, what we expect to know, who are they telling yes to or who are they telling no, unless you name the organizations, what is the criteria of being able to do that to keep up with any kind of abuses and have a non-transferable.
Okay. Do you have that?
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
Thank you. Representative Silcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question was also along those same lines. I will say, first of all, Representative Kirby, that the bill is substantially improved from last year, and I appreciate your hard work on this. But my question also was about the private service organizations, and I'd just like to add that I think if there could be some established or named organizations with their logos on the cards, if we're not going to have this run and licensed by the state, that I agree with Representative Ronders that then there would be, you know, a recognizable standard, so that if you're a waitress in a restaurant or what have you, then those industries could be notified that these are the acceptable credentials. Is really what I'm saying.
All right.
Furthermore, I was just curious because there is, since there has been so much abuse in this area, there's really no free pass on this. There's no warning. I guess if I were a young person and wanting to joke around with this, you know, not intentionally, but joking around, I know you say it has to be willfully, but if I brought a dog into a restaurant today and I wasn't aware of this, didn't realize I was breaking the law, I feel like $2,000 in imprisonment for 30 days is a pretty steep penalty for especially a young person that was unaware of the law. I was just curious if you contemplated a warning or.
Well, I'm not sure I agree. Willfully trying to pull it off as a service animal and not
Right.
being aware is the same thing. I think if even a young person, if you willfully try to say this is a service animal, yeah, it's trained to perform a major life activity, I think that's a little different level. But if you've got some proposed language, we would be happy to entertain it.
I was just curious how y'all came up with this.
Yeah.
Any suggestions
Yeah,
or?
the willful misrepresentation we thought handled most of that. But
Okay. Just curious.
Representative Schofield. Okay, thank you. You're gaining favor already, that you listen, and if your question's been answered, you don't have to ask it again. Thank you. Representative Price.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In looking this over, most of my questions have been answered, with the exception of who will determine that somebody has a mental inability to perform major life activities, including, as it says in line 2122, interacting with others. That's awfully broad, and since you've said already that DHS is not inclined to oversee this, then you'd have to wonder, well, who is specifically, and who is able to make a diagnosis that applies to the inability to function without this service animal or dog, whatever we're going to call it, in interacting with others. My other concern is what are the rights for that companion animal? You know, do they have a right to a seat on a plane, or do they have a right to have someone bring them water or food if they're in a restaurant? You know, do they have any additional rights? But my real concern is if someone is not familiar with the card, and if the animal's not well identified, i.e. it does say to have something on its collar, but if the dog has long hair and the collar is covered, and the person tries to enter an establishment and is met with not necessarily resistance, but some questioning of their appropriateness to have the animal, and could that be construed as interference, and could then that leave the person, potentially liable for a fine? And it's a pretty steep fine, $2,000. We would assume that would only occur if they were, not permitted or granted entrance, but it might be interpreting this as, quote, interference with, and just asking them to produce the card. Is that considered interference? Is a lengthy discussion, is that interference? So I think it could cause emotional distress to a person who's already emotionally distressed, and then it gets just really complicated. So that sort of pretty much covers that. And I think obviously it have to be very well defined who is able to provide or authorize the ID. And if you've seen the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, it's a thick book, and there are a lot of things in that book, and I'm not sure who all would be qualified to say that a person suffers from one of those conditions.
Well, as far as that medical question, I'd defer to you and your knowledge base on that more than mine on who could define that. As far as the rights of any animal or pet, that goes down to our property rights. An apartment complex, there's a lot of them that allow pets. Hotels allow pets. Restaurants that allow pets in. That's up to them. They can allow them, or they can choose to say no pets allowed. Different thing is with the service animal. Like I said, that service animal is their eyes. Our eyes are allowed in that apartment, our eyes are allowed in that restaurant, so are theirs. And so the rights of the pets are always the same, that yes, the property owner says they're allowed. They can have rules, they can, whatever they want to do on feeding, watering, one of the very early stories where this came from was somebody with a little companion animal in a restaurant that he was fine with pets coming in there. And then they put it up on the table and is eating out of the plate that people eat out of, and that caused some issues. And then the next person with the service animal comes in, and the owner, is saying no. and then they had to take time to explain, this is a service animal, and go through the whole part of that. This animal is allowed, whether you really want it here or not, as long as it behaves and does the things, because it is trained. As far as, and then your last one on the identifying the animal, I think just asking about it, and the Restaurant Association and their group down here have done some good things trying to get the information out to restaurant owners about service animals and what they're allowed to do. Most of these animals are always going to be wearing their vest when they're working, but I think there's some here that have some animals that can better answer that about how they're identified. And typically it says collar on here, but it's really, most time I see them in a vest, and even whether they're being trained, they're wearing a vest. And
So is there any reason not to have that identification larger than just on the collar?
I'll defer to the service animal community, and if some of them work with just a collar, I'm not trying to burden them, but if they always wear a vest, I think we can certainly add the vest wording in there. But we'll get that information as we move through this other changes, hopefully very quickly.
Okay. Representative Frye.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just thinking out loud, and to Representative Price's question, could we get with the medical community and set this up as a prescription for the cards to be allocated by those organizations? Seriously, if you're talking about who's going to make the determination on a mental illness and how the pet would help you function further, and I'm sure that in some respects is already going on.
And to answer your question, yes, certainly we can do that. We've worked real hard, and I guess the issue we dance around is not trying to create another bureaucracy or level of government or issue.
Well, sure.
You think about it, if there's a licensed, registered service animal requirement, this would be done. Here's the license requirement, here's the, they all have to be registered, but we're trying to stay away from that for those not only with the service animals, but those training the service animals as well. If you watch Fox 5 News in the morning, they've had their Operation Max as they've been helping train the service animal. It takes years to do that. So we're trying to stay away from adding another level of bureaucracy. If we get this in the form and some of these things answered that you all have brought up today, we come back in 2 years and say we still got to do more, then that may be step 2 to start looking at something like that. But I'm trying to avoid adding extra layers right now.
Well, follow-up question?
Yeah. May
I continue? I would just think it's not really adding the bureaucracy, because the enforcement of it, it's just an idea that in our tenants that we have sometimes over in Athens, you have some folks that are ex-military, and their doctors have said, hey, get a dog, it'll make you feel better and you can cope more with it, And all that would be is just a little prescription card. Literally a prescription for a dog. And then this kind of solves it all, I think, if you have a prescription
just to make
for
you
it.
feel better wouldn't be a service animal, and it wouldn't be eligible for the card. That's a comfort animal or a pet to make you feel better.
Okay.
And again, that would put some onus on the doctors to make sure we're understanding service animals versus the companions.
A comfort animal.
And comforts.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
For Representative Frye and for the authors, several years ago, I authored a bill that was brought to my attention by the Council on Aging, as well as when I started looking at the developmental disability population. It was trying to make it not so broad. This dealt with jury exemption, and what we didn't want to do is make it so large that everybody could go through that and say, look at me and my exemption. And what we did there is we said the definition was by a person, immediate family member, by a person with an illness so severe that they could not be left alone, But to make that diagnosis, to your point, was we did require something from a physician that said that. So every cousin who's watching somebody once a month wasn't trying to get out of jury duty too. So I'm just saying that because it wasn't a burden at that particular time to get something from the medical profession. And I think we should engage them before we necessarily dictate. So we're not putting something on them so they don't just let somebody's dog. But I have seen that kind of legislation where we've asked them to do it and they didn't push back on that particular time because it was for the right reason. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I have 5 more people, 3 are repeats. I'm going to take those, and then I want us to talk to the people who've signed up that have service animals or concerned, and then we'll send it back to the drawing board. Okay. Representative Schofield, you've come up with a question.
Question. Thank you, Madam Chair. And to Representative Frye's point, when you need, the reason why this is very big and popular, because you can go on the internet and pay $50 to $100 to get identification for your pet. So I think it's very appropriate if I have to get a state-issued disability hang tag to let you know, and you may not see my disability, but the fact that I need to prove that I have something, I think it's very appropriate that we engage the medical community on this level.
Thank you. Representative Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll waive. It's been discussed.
Okay. All right. Okay, we've got, all right, Representative Petrie.
Representative Kirby, I'll try to be brief. On line 23, again, I mentioned this earlier, but I have to come back to this as I've thought about it. So we go from physically disabled or mentally impaired. And if you go to line 20, 21, and 22, one of the ADA requirements is interacting with others. So I read a couple of years ago that Xanax was like the most widely prescribed prescription on earth. Probably, I don't know, 20% of the country are taking that. So if you open up this type of a process to everyone with mental illness, this just seems to be a massive expansion to me. And so if you think about individuals who are renting property, who, as you alluded to earlier, have a right to say no pets indoors, that's their property and they have a right to do that. You can't do that with a service animal, but that's their private property rights that are being violated, if indeed people misuse this. And it seems to me this is just a huge expansion by just saying to mental illness, which is so all-encompassing. That's all I wanted to say.
Again, when you talk about, somebody's using Xanax and has a comfort dog is not a dog trained to perform a major life activity.
Well, I'm not so sure of that by the language is what I'm saying. I'm not so, my point is I'm not so sure of that.
Okay. All right. I do think Representative Mitchell just pulled up off the internet. eBay. You can buy a thing for your dog to wear and 5 cards for $19.99. This is becoming a problem, so I appreciate everybody. We need to work this out. And nothing, as we do down here, we start with bills that may not be totally perfect. We may need to work with the medical community on the mental impairment part to get it tied down, or the disability community get it tied down tighter. Okay, Representative Mitchell, is that what you had to do?
No, I just wanted to be clear on something. The only thing this bill changes in reality is not the mere bringing a dog into an establishment, store, restaurant, or whatever. That isn't the violation. The violation is I bring the dog in and I am presenting it as if it was a service dog. If I'm asked the question, is it a service dog, and I put off as if it is, I produce documents as if it were, that is the violation.
Correct.
Okay, so if a young man brings in a dog and they says this is a service dog, it is not, there is no violation.
Correct.
Okay.
And your last, Representative Henson, if you will be brief.
No, I'll pass.
You're on pass, okay.
Madam Chair, if I could say one thing before we do it, when it comes to all of our agencies, and just about all have been contacted, the response is always, well, we don't do this. That's because nobody does this, all right? And I'm very disappointed in the reluctancy of any of them that have this kind of responsibility that are shying away from that responsibility. It's been very sad to see that and deal with all of them, but we will find one, and as a group, we'll tell them who's going to do it.
Well, Representative Kirby, I don't,
We have
I
the-
don't think in this committee we have any trouble telling
I know.
public health or somebody that they're going to take something.
Yep.
And we've had them tell me that they didn't want it, and I've said tough.
Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes the bureaucrats in state government think they run everything, and you know what? They don't. So
And that's why we are very happy to be in front of this committee.
fine. And we got a lot of great bureaucrats.
Yes, we do.
But we got some that think that they don't have to do what we ask them to do.
And, you know,
Judiciary know we can vet a bill too.
yeah, and the last thing, you know, we actually started off looking at whether or not we could do something with driver services and have a picture ID, and found out we don't have any equipment in the state that can do something other than the actual driver's license to put the dog and the owner's picture on there. So it cost a lot of money just to generate these things, so.
That's it. Okay, I didn't have anybody to sign up to speak with about this, but maybe they didn't. Oh, okay. What? It was on the podium in the wrong place. All right, let's just go. Who would like to speak on this bill? Come on, and you just come up front, and you, where it's convenient for you. Oh God. Whatever's best for you.
Okay, I have handouts for you to read later.
Thank you.
My name's Betsy Grinovich, and I am representing Georgia Guide Dog Users. And of course, we are a chapter connected to Georgia Guide Dog Users, Inc., and also the American Council of the Blind. So to make my comments brief, I wrote them so I can read them. And if you have questions, I'll gladly answer. James is my second service dog. We just put down my retired one yesterday.
Oh,
So
sorry.
this is a very difficult time, but it's good we could be here. I'm speaking on behalf of Georgia Guide Dog Users, or GGDU, as we refer to it. We applaud the efforts of the sponsor of this bill to strengthen the laws of the state of Georgia related to the rights of disabled persons who are partnered with service animals. We also support the inclusion of penalties for businesses that deny access to a disabled person accompanied by a service animal, or that deny access to a trainer or raiser of a service animal. Another important aspect of this bill is that the section that provides for penalties for persons with misrepresenting a pet as a service animal, a provision sorely needed at a time when dogs in particular are increasingly being brought into public places that don't allow pets without their presence being challenged. This department, and our concern is with DHS having this, and here's why, having the opportunity to do the cards. This department has no experience regarding service animals, or which would be relevant private organizations that provide services to persons with disabilities. DHS staff would also have no knowledge about what trainers or raisers of service animals are engaged in these activities in Georgia. Most organizations providing services to people with varying disabilities also lack the knowledge to decide who should legitimately be issued such an information card when it is requested. It could be, and also the card in the future could be deemed as mandatory that service animal users in Georgia must carry such information cards. And so our concern there is that some people could think of it as mandatory, misconstrue the law, and then someone comes out of state to Georgia without the card. So that's our concern with the card. And we're very happy, Representative Kirby, to hear you are working on the attack law, because that was my last concern, that it wasn't there.
Yep.
And the only request for that is that you talk to us, because we have just another thing we'd like to include in that. But that's my concern. But most of ours was positive for this new writing of this bill.
Thank you for coming. Do you, and for your presentation, do you have a place where in government where you think that this would fit? I mean, we don't usually do anything to our vets. So should we somehow put it with our veterinarians?
Most of us who go get our dogs from schools have cards. I have 2 of mine with me for James. I have a card right with me I carry all the time that shows he is from a school. So we don't really have a place that was the trainers and the puppy raisers. I'm not sure what you would do different, but for those that are school trained, we have cards already. Our concern about the card is that it's going to be construed as mandatory. So we would like to see language that would show that it's not, make it stronger, that it's not mandatory. As far as an organization carrying it, I think they may be dead on that it has to be some kind of medical profession, because a Lions Club can't tell you if the dog is officially trained. You know, they can't tell you that the trainer is actually training a service animal. It's going to have to be someone who, and for the trainers, I don't know where you would go for them, but for the service animals themselves, it may have to be a medical profession. But I agree, thank you reps for finding it, that you can get all this fake stuff online. Colleges deal with it all the time, and it's there everywhere.
Thank you very much. Others that would like to speak on the bill? Is there anyone else that?
Wait a minute.
Oh,
Sure.
sorry.
There's one thing I'd like to ask her to share with the committee that you need to know about a true service animal as well.
Okay.
The cost of training a true service animal, even if it's self-trained, it doesn't cost as much. But those that go through schools is $60,000 from birth all the way through training.
Right. And if I would say to members of this committee, we have a group here in Atlanta, and I'm sure there's more than one, Canine Assistance. If you want to go to one of the most heartwarming things that you will ever see, go to their graduation. About a week before graduation, the dogs have been trained. It's a week or two. The people that are going to get the dogs come in and train with them. And then at graduation, they actually get their dogs. And to see, just in that short period of time, what joy it gives to a person that's disabled is unbelievable. And the love that those dogs attach to those people just right off. So I would suggest that you visit Canine Assistant graduation sometime and just see it. Go ahead.
If you want to really see training dogs and training by kids, go to UGA. They have 150 or more of the dogs that came from the school where I got James.
They're training them
They're training them in the college atmosphere, and then on the weekends another trainer takes them and socializes them elsewhere.
Okay. Well, it certainly adds to the amount of dogs available because it's very intensive and takes a long time, and so there's lots of people on the waiting list for these trained animals. So it is really amazing. Anybody else decide they need to speak? Okay, Representative Kirby, you have got your orders, and I'm still trying to see James. Golden lab, a yellow lab. So, great. And if you will just work on this right away and try to get us a substitute, we'll see if we can't find a law to start beginning on this, and knowing that, you know, nothing is always, we don't really turn out perfect laws, and there's, as long as we get 95% of it right and the major things right, we can always come back and tweak it in another year if we have to. So thank you very much. To the committee, I am going to pull my bill, House Bill 747, till I can have further discussion on it. I put it on pretty quickly, and so I need to get some people together, I think. And so we are adjourned. Thank you very much for being here.